Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm so glad to have all of you here to join us for the first of our Aspen Tech Policy Hub demo days. I hope you're all well, first of all, in these difficult times. Normally, we'd be hitting the road with our panelists. We'd be going from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco to show off in person all the amazing things that our fellows have done. But in these difficult times, as you know, that's not possible. But we're turning lemons into lemonade because we're able to bring this amazing programming to so many people across the country. And so we're extremely grateful to you for being here. So just to give you a little sense of how this will work, we have two amazing fellowship teams that are going to be presenting today. Throughout the presentations, you are welcome to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. Please feel free to ask those questions anytime. We'll make sure to answer a bunch of them at the end of the program. And also note and keep an eye on the chat function. During the chat function, we will actually be able to release to you the products that our fellows have produced, so you'll be able to check them out in real time. We're doing this in a true digital form today. Finally, this is a brand new team doing these webinars. While Aspen Digital has been doing an amazing job putting together webinars, we're totally starting fresh, and so please forgive us if there are any technical difficulties throughout. I'm sure there will be, and I guess that's part of policy at the speed of tech. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our first fellowship team. Liv Erickson is a senior manager at Mozilla, and she worked with Cecilia Donnelly-Crum, who is a developer at the Minnesota Senate. And the two of them have worked together thinking about how to protect your digital afterlife. What should we do in order to prepare for the eventuality of how to handle our digital assets after we die? I'm excited to have them release all the amazing work that they've done to you today. And with that, over to Cecilia and to Liv.
Thanks, Betsy, and thanks everybody for coming. So once again, this is the Digital Afterlife project. Both Liv and I are software engineers with a background in open source. Liv has spent her career working on virtual identity, and I've been trained in pastoral care, so we both thought this would be an interesting, difficult project to tackle together. So let's start with a story. Lucille and Bill are an older couple, and unfortunately, Bill passes away. So what next? What's Lucille to do? Lucille knows Bill has online accounts, but she doesn't have the passwords. You can't see this yet. Lucille knows that Bill has online accounts, but she doesn't have the passwords. So what is she to do? How can she manage Bill's digital afterlife? First of all, what is the digital afterlife? It's all the online accounts, digital photos, messages, emails, and data in general that are left behind when someone passes away. Since we live a lot of our lives online, especially now, this is a lot of information and much of it survives us. This leads to a few consequences. According to the AARP, about 800,000 newly deceased Americans in the first year after their death have their identity stolen. Existing privacy policies might mean that loved ones can't access photos or other data. So for example, if Bill put photos of his 50th anniversary in iCloud, Lucille wouldn't be able to get them back from Apple unless she had a court order. Some platforms do have management options. Notably, Facebook has Legacy Contact and Google has an inactive account manager. Legacy Contact lets users choose someone to steward their account after they pass away, so it can remain as a memorial site for their community. An inactive account manager will transfer your account to the person you choose, so your spouse or your child, after a set period. So if you don't log in for a month, then Google would let, say, Lucille know that she can now access Bill's account. Just for some context, the concept of the digital afterlife came up for us in a brunch conversation at the Hub. One of the other fellows had this question about how data could be used for good or for ill after death, and Liv and I both thought that was a really interesting problem and wanted to pick it up and go further with it. So here's the crux of it. Even when an acting fiduciary knows account information, like Lucille knew that Bill had photos in iCloud, gaining access to it or closing those accounts can be a difficult or impossible process. And this is the big problem we set out to address in this project. There is currently no one simple, enforceable way for Bill to tell Lucille what he wanted to happen to his online accounts, even if he thought of it, which many people don't. And even if he did all that, there's no way for Lucille to easily carry out his wishes. We're talking about Bill and Lucille in this presentation, but this is a major problem because it affects all of us at some point. We share and store information about ourselves online, and the laws and policies that we have are not clear about what happens to that information after we pass away. There isn't a clear and definitely not an enforceable way for any of us, like Bill, to express our wishes about what should happen to our online information when we die. The ways that do exist, like legacy contact and inactive account manager, are piecemeal and still not very well known in the general public. So Lucille, even with the best of intentions, will have a really hard time closing Bill's accounts and removing any needed data like photos. And it may go without saying, but bereavement is a difficult and painful time of life. Managing a loved one's estate can be overwhelming, and one of our goals of this project was to make it slightly simpler. So we took a three-pronged approach to solving this, with the three prongs being individual awareness, data privacy laws, and better design by companies that own online platforms. I'll hand it over to Liv to talk more about those.
Thanks, Cecilia. The first pillar of our proposal with the Digital Afterlife project is to raise awareness of the value of and need to secure these digital assets as part of end-of-life planning. This includes making records of which accounts exist and the information that's stored in each of those accounts, as well as how a loved one can get access to them once they pass away. And it's important to note that some digital assets might have a monetary value, like a virtual property that you own or digital currencies, but others might be sentimental, for example, messages or digital photo albums. And depending on the type of asset that exists in a digital account, the laws governing how someone may be able to get access to them might be different. So consider a conflict that could arrive between grieving next of kin for something over a sentimental value, like a Facebook account. Suppose a privacy conscious family member decides that they don't want their parents' account to stay active once they pass away, so they close the account using a process through Facebook to close the account, which is maybe in direct contrast to how other surviving beneficiaries may want that account to be handled, perhaps through memorialization. We think it's important that individuals can make these decisions about what they want to have happen to their accounts before they pass away. And by setting explicit instructions for what can be done with accounts, individuals can help guide their loved ones through making these decisions after their death. But as Cecilia mentioned, recognizing that these accounts exist and have value, whether monetary or sentimental value, is just the first part of the challenge. So with that, we, in addition to collecting resources for how people can approach their own digital estate planning, turn to the second pillar of our proposal on how digital assets can be better managed, and that's incorporating fiduciary rights into data privacy laws. Most states in the US now are either putting data privacy laws into practice or considering writing them. And because of this, we look at these regulations as a potential vehicle for fiduciary rights. Many states' proposals or the laws that have been passed regarding data privacy have the concept of an authorized agent included in these laws, which means that if an individual or a consumer grants one person or an agency the authority to manage the access and deletion of their online data on their behalf, that authorized agent can then go and shut down accounts or get access and understand what data has been collected and stored about that user. The CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act, does this, but it requires that the consumer actually signs the directive giving that agent the ability to have the authority to go and delete their data. We think that by expanding the definition of what an authorized agent is to include a legally recognized beneficiary or fiduciary agent for a deceased user, that more people will be able to have someone act on behalf of a deceased user in order to get accounts closed more effectively and efficiently. But as we're thinking about these two approaches, there's still a power player that has a lot of responsibility and potential to make this whole process really seamless, and that's the platforms themselves, which brings us to the third pillar of our approach, the Digital Afterlife Design Toolkit. The design toolkit was created to help companies that have online accounts and store information design features that would allow their users to set digital directives. Cecilia mentioned a couple of these earlier. Facebook has a legacy contact where you can choose who is the person who will steward your account after you pass away. And Google has the inactive account manager. And these types of tools give users the most granular control over how each of their accounts and the specific information in those accounts are handled. It gives the most agency to individuals to handle their information and decide how they want that to pass on after they do. Which allows for a lot more security of those accounts, as well as reducing the amount of emotional angst that family members may need to go through in resolving this without any kind of directive from the individual themselves. We also are calling on more companies to better handle the process of reporting a death. This isn't standardized. Sometimes you would just go through a normal support channel. Sometimes there's a dedicated email address or a form on a platform, but the process and the information that's required to close accounts isn't standardized, which means that platforms may ask too little or too much information, which could involve either putting a lot of burden on the surviving family members to close down what may be upwards of 300 online accounts, or it becomes very easy to impersonate somebody's family member and have accounts closed in an unauthorized way. So there's not a lot of design research being done in this area, but we think that it's really important because, like Cecilia said, it's going to impact 100% of users of any online platform at some point. And we think that companies can start taking these actions now to make a really big difference. The design toolkit, the advocacy resources, and our draft regulatory language is all available online, DigitalAfterlife.Online. And we recognize that thinking about this and talking about the end of life with regard to technology is a difficult conversation, but we think that it's time that it starts being included in how platforms are handling their user accounts. Thank you, and back to you, Betsy.
Thanks so much, Liv and Cecilia. Amazing work, and I really urge everybody to go follow through the link that Liv suggested, and also we'll post a link in the chat that will take you to our homepage and will enable you to go dig in. There's some pretty amazing work being done in the space, and so we're very excited to see how this can all pull together. And I think, you know, what's really unique about this project is that it focuses on an area that a lot of people don't want to talk about, and therefore it's really an innovative space in which there hasn't been a lot done. And so I hope all of you watching will take that into account as you start thinking about areas where you could have policy impact like our fellows are trying to do here. So next we want to switch gears a little bit. Well, first I actually do want to remind everybody first, use the Q&A button to ask questions throughout for any of our speakers. Towards the end, we will get into Q&A time, and we'd love to receive your questions and really make this a conversation with everybody participating today. And so with that, I'd like to turn to our second team. We call this the team of Matthews. So we have Matthew Schroeder, who's a security engineer at Salesforce, and then Matt Sievers, who has a long career in cybersecurity, largely in the military. And the two of them are taking their expertise on cybersecurity and applying it to the cybersecurity of small businesses. And so they're going to share with you today some new and innovative tools to help small businesses, especially in these tough times, help shore up their digital assets. So with that, over to you, Matt and Matthew.
Great. Thanks, Betsy. So our project is Big Security for small business. And for our team, we have myself, Matthew Schroeder. So I'm an information security and privacy professional. I am currently at Salesforce working on security assurance, and I have had a variety of roles in security and privacy throughout my career and worked at companies like Facebook, Visa, and Booz Allen. And I'll let my partner, Matt, introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Matt, and I was in the Air Force for about 10 years doing cyberspace operations, and it was a specialization in cybersecurity. And the other members of our team are Liv Erickson, who you already met in the previous presentation, and Alex Romero, who is at the Defense Digital Service, and he was one of the leads on the Hack the Pentagon program.
Great, thanks, Matt. All right, so how did we get to this topic? So we just discussed, Matt and I have a background in information security, and we're thinking about what groups are particularly high risk and who we can help in this fellowship specifically. So we came across in our research small businesses. And we asked ourselves, okay, well, do small businesses really need help with cybersecurity? So let's look at some of the stats. So first of all, about 2/3 of senior decision makers, small business owners, think that they're not a target for cyber attacks. They're not really at risk. Yet, more than half of small businesses suffered a data breach within the last year. And a significant amount of those that suffered a data breach had trouble staying in business or even went out of business after the data breach due to the impacts. So going back to the question, we figured, yes, small businesses do need some help with cybersecurity. And then we're thinking the next step for our project was, who really has a vested interest, partner with small businesses that really want them to stay secure? So government. Government needs small businesses to be secure. Government commonly participates and commonly partners with small businesses. So let's take California, for example. California has a nice tight budget of about $220 billion for 2020, 2021. And they have a target spending for small businesses. They want to help small businesses out and give them opportunity. A lot of states do this. So California's target is about 25% or even more. So when you do the math, that's billions of dollars that they spend in small businesses. And overall, that equals to us a very high risk to stay in local government if small businesses are not secure. So next, I'll turn it over to Matt to talk about our overall problem statement.
So when we looked at those ideas, we ended up coming with, how do we get the small businesses who are at risk to actually do something? And how can we get governments to help them take those actual actions? And we ended up with two solutions. The first solution is for governments to drive change on their end by updating their own policies. In this case, procurement policies. This idea is based on a program that the DoD adopted a few years ago, where every company that does a contract with the DoD has to have minimum cybersecurity standards. So as we drove the solution, we came up with four different products. The first is a policy brief for state, local, tribal, and territorial governments on how to actually implement this and how they can get value from this kind of program. Our second is a actual policy for them to adopt that they can either drop right into their own procurement policies or to tailor to their specific jurisdictions. Third, we have contract language that they can drop right into their contracts. And fourth, we have a cybersecurity template, a plan template that businesses can use in order to comply with this policy. Our second solution, I'm going to turn it back over to Matthew in order to talk about that.
Great, thanks, Matt. So now that we've really set the bar for the small businesses, tried to give them something to provide guidance on what kind of standards, what kind of requirements they need to meet to be secure, we actually need to help them to meet that bar. So that's where the second part of our solution comes in, which is to create security resources that are tailored to small businesses. So we have a website that we've used to centralize all the resources and outputs that we created for small businesses, which we call our Big Security for Small Businesses website, which we have the URL here and will be also shared. And the general approach that we took, Matt and I did a lot of research, did talk to stakeholders like small businesses themselves, people that help out small businesses, state and local government. And our general approach was basically to provide small businesses very foundational activities that have a kind of a high bang for your buck or high security return on investment, things that are simple that are actually doable instead of kind of dropping, here's 200 pages of everything you need to do and just go to it, because that doesn't really work that well for small businesses. So example, to start out with in our small business website, we have some motivation. What can actually motivate small businesses based on our research? So this is just an example excerpt of an infographic we prepared. One big thing that we found in our research is that being able to show the impact of real-world small business attacks is a big motivator. And then in our first interactive output, we created a security awareness campaign, which we call Eat Hackers for Lunch. And so why lunch? Well, it goes back to our overall approach, which is these small foundational security activities that small businesses can actually do. And these are things that they could do even during your lunch break. So for example, we just have an excerpt of a few activities like securing your network, password protection, two-factor authentication. And for each of these are very simple activities to help to really take the right steps to secure your network, things that are achievable for small businesses. So right now it's self-guided on our website, but we also created an operational plan. So someone like a state and local government could take it and create an interactive session, or someone like a small business, like the Small Business Administration or a Small Business Development Center as well. So our next output we call Laser. It's our lightweight assessment of security risk. So what it's meant to be, like I said, lightweight. So it takes 50 minutes or less, no registration required. You don't need to be a cybersecurity expert to take it. You can just have, if you know your business well and have very basic background IT, you can answer the questions, no problem. So that's just an example of a few of the questions they're going through. And then as output, based on your risk level, so low, medium, high, you get a set of tailored recommendations. In addition to your risk level, it'll also give you recommendations based on the questions you answered. So let's say if you said, I don't know much, or I don't have anything in place to protect my financial transactions, we'll give you resources to help you with that. So it gives you a really good starting point, and that's the goal of Laser. All right, I'll turn it back to Matt to talk about where we go next.
So now that we have these two components, we have the government driving change within their procurement policies and their procurement processes, and we have the educational resources to help businesses actually take action. Where do we want these resources to go? And on the policy side, we really hope that city councils, state and local other state and local government agencies, organization, chief information security officers are the ones that adopt these and drive them and put them into place in their own organization's jurisdictions. If they can do that, they're going to drive change across the organization, even those that don't do business with their organization themselves. They're going to set norms within their own organizations and drive change across the area. Matthew, you want to talk about where the resources are going to go?
Sure. Yeah, so the resources really could fit into a lot of different places. The way that we set it up, small businesses can use it directly today, but also state and local government can use it, kind of adopt it, tailor it, send it out, use it to interact with small businesses, help them to be secure and stay in local areas. Small business administration from a federal perspective, and small business development centers, which are often the starting point for all small businesses when they want to start up, are a really good place for these resources to go. We're also talking with some nonprofits that are focused on providing secure cybersecurity to small businesses as well. So overall, there's just a lot of opportunity here. There's a lot of challenge for small businesses to secure themselves. And we saw a lot of that when research really dove into this huge area. And cyber threats are going to continue increasing. So this is a really important problem if we want to support our small businesses. So Matt and I are both excited to continue trying to drive this project forward, work with other people, collaborate, and we're really excited to see what the future holds for us. Thanks.
Thank you. Back to you, Betsy.
Thanks so much, team. We're really excited about this project. I think this is a unique moment, which you couldn't have anticipated when you started this project, in which so much has moved online that companies really need to respond in a new way to protecting their cybersecurity. And many companies that didn't think of themselves as digital companies now need to think about this as well. So we're extremely excited. Please go to the link that has been shared in the chat if you want to see some of the amazing tools that Matt, Matthew, and their team have produced. And of course, if you have any questions for them, for Liv and Cecilia, or for other team members, please submit them through the Q&A and we'll get to them after the programming. I now want to turn, and I'm extremely excited to do this, to both a great friend of the Hub and a wonderful leader in this space, Raj Shah. Raj is the chairman and co-founder at Arceo.ai, and he's the former head of the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental. So he's been working right at the intersection of issues of cyber insurance, issues of cybersecurity, procurement has come up, I know, a lot. So I'm extremely excited to get Raj's reactions to these projects. So with that, over to you, Raj, for a short keynote speech on these issues.
Great, thank Betsy, and thank you for having me here. It's incredible what you've done here with the Aspen group and this tech policy. It's a much needed endeavor, so thank you for what you're doing and the opportunity to come and speak and share some perspectives I might have on these projects, both of which I thought were very interesting and very relevant. So maybe what I'll do is I'll share some thoughts on both, some ideas to ponder, and then we can turn this into more of a discussion with Q&A with the folks and with you, Betsy. So the first one, the digital legacy or lifetime asset custody and transfer, super important, right? Particularly as we unfortunately have gone through this COVID period. There's a whole new framework, both legally as well as practically, that all of us need to embrace, where everything of our personal information and just critical info is hosted in third-party platforms with a variety of different privacy and custody and user agreements. And so how do you make sense of that? I think having some centralized resource for people, maybe it's driven by government, would be immensely helpful. So I applaud the group for doing that. I'll talk a little bit more length on the second one, because the small business cybersecurity, because that's a topic that I'm very involved with right now with one of my current companies. So, first off, I'd echo what the team says. Small businesses are super important for cybersecurity, if not even more important than large companies. So there's over 30 million small businesses in the US. It represents nearly half of the US GDP and employs 60 million people. So it is a vast portion of our economy. And it's not one that's well set up to be secure. There's certainly not enough high-end CISOs for 30 million businesses. And most small business owners are day in, day out trying to grow and maintain their businesses. And they don't necessarily have the time to spend and devote to cybersecurity, and they don't have access to those resources. But the consequences of an attack are really, really grave. The stat I think the team showed that said 60% of certain companies that come under attack, particularly if they're retail, can go out of business. It's a serious risk. There's certainly some very specific anecdotes. But even more importantly, small businesses sometimes are even at a greater risk of being attacked than large companies. And I'll give you a specific example in that attackers will oftentimes target smaller businesses because they just know they don't have the same level of security to be a vector to attack their larger businesses. So there's a very famous example of the Target breach that occurred 6-7 years ago now, in which the attackers, knowing that Target itself had pretty strong and robust security practices, actually breached one of their vendors. It was a heating and air conditioning monitoring company in New Jersey, a much weaker security, broke into there, found a pathway from that company into Target system. Once they got into the Target network, they were able to bridge over to the point of sale systems and stole tens of millions of credit cards. And so again, there's many ulterior motives. So let's then kind of think about what are some of the solutions, because there's no easy answer to how do you protect these small businesses. And so in my mind, I've kind of categorized 3 ways to maybe help small businesses. So one is to just outsource the security to big companies. So by that, I mean, if you can entirely host your system on AWS, Microsoft, or Google, they have great security and they have a much stronger security team than any small business or startup could aspire to have. And then some of the things that I think the team highlighted, 2-factor authentication and having that secure becomes in place. But that's not an option for all companies. Not everybody can just move entirely to the cloud and be post infrastructure. Some people will have to have some physical systems, retail, in-person things. So if you can't outsource it, great, but that's not relevant for all. The second one is to engage in tech solutions or platforms that try to bring the capabilities that are available to large companies down to the smaller ones. So, one of the things that I think large companies get to benefit from is the concept of herd immunity, in that if you have a vendor where one of their customers gets breached, they quickly understand the cause of that attack, the vulnerabilities, and then can send signals and patches to protect everybody. Again, most of those platforms, though, are larger, more expensive things. There are a slew of new companies trying to bring that down to the small business level. But again, that takes a little bit of effort and time spent on IT and CISO. So again, not always applicable. And then the final one, which in all full disclosure, is an approach that I'm taking with a company, is to combine cybersecurity with insurance. Meaning, hey, can I buy an insurance policy that will protect my small business from an attack financially? But in order to get that insurance, the insurance company or entity will require a certain level of cybersecurity protection, and they continuously monitor it. It's just like, all these small businesses certainly have fire insurance, and if they want to have fire insurance policy for their retail store on Main Street, which you must have, right, by regulation, the insurance company says, well, you have to have a sprinkler, and you have to use fire-resistant materials. You can't build your house out of hay, right? There's a whole set of series of standards that you have to abide by to get fire insurance. There's a corollary, I think, coming in cyber, where people will require cyber insurance, and to get it, you'll have to have some level of standard. So that's an emerging area, and there's a couple of companies. But I think all of that really comes down to, I know the team touched at the end, is the issue of incentives. What incentive can you give to a small business that they devote the time and energy to finding out which one of these 3 buckets of solutions they want to implement to protect themselves, right? Because their main focus, again, day in, day out, is just how do I stay in business? And so there's probably a category of things on the carrot side and a category of things on the stick side. So there on the stick, there's regulations. There are both commercial vendors as well as the government that are trying to enact standards. I know DoD was mentioned. There's something called CMMC, which is, I think, Cyber Maturity Model Certification. That works. But it basically says, hey, if you want to be a vendor to the U.S. government, you have to have these series of cyber controls in place. I think that's coming out soon. There's vendors that require the same. So there's kind of a stick standpoint. Then there's the carrot side, right, which is if you have a certain level of cyber hygiene and protection, are you becoming a preferred vendor? Are there cost savings, right? Your insurance policy goes down if you have better security. So I think there's incentives on that side. But this is, I think, early days of a really important topic, and so I'm glad that the team tackled it. So with that, Betsy, I'll turn it over to whatever questions and topics you want to dive into deeper.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to start with a few questions for you, Raj, and then we're going to get to a bunch of the audience questions. So first, sort of going back to the digital afterlife, you mentioned a big focus on insurance, and you're looking at the cyber insurance industry. Have you come across any thinking about insurance in the digital afterlife space? Has that been a conversation that started? And if not, why do you think it hasn't happened yet?
That's really interesting. I haven't thought about it, but that's just my lack of imagination. So I don't know what is available in the insurance world, but I think there are end-of-life types of insurance that are coming to market. So there are funeral insurance products that folks can buy such that they can reduce the burden on their next of kin when people pass, and that's actually a very fast-growing business. I could see one where there's something similar for your digital footprint, where you have a policy that perhaps would cover any services costs and other things to transfer and just kind of do some of the manual stuff, because again, we have so many different platforms. So I think it's a great idea, Betsy, and maybe one of your teams will go and launch that.
Oh, good. More projects. Excellent. That's what we're always looking for at the Hub. And then on the cyber side, I know that you spent a lot of time thinking about government procurement, so I cannot let the moment go. Have you given any thought to procurement questions for small businesses, cities, local jurisdictions? I think many of us who used to work at the federal government understand that federal procurement has been really big. Small businesses often are working at the state and local level. Any thoughts on tips, best practices? What should people be doing in the procurement space to help move these things forward?
Right, from the government, from the buyer's side? Yeah.
Yes, or actually from both. I'd be interested in, both what small businesses can do to help themselves get contracts with state and local governments, and how to ensure that cybersecurity is taken into account on both the supply and the demand side.
Right, right. Well, let me speak to from the buyer's side, because I think that's where the majority of the reform needs to happen. I just think that the federal government and even parts of state and local have procurement and buying philosophies and processes that were designed for a bygone era, right? So the DoD does a really good job of buying long life cycle products. So think about aircraft carriers or fighter jets, something you're going to keep for 30, 40, even 50 years. They have a very good process in terms of making sure it meets requirements, that it meets certain standards to go and purchase, and that cycle can take 3-4 years. But if you're buying a piece of software that's going to be obsolete in 6 months, you spend 4 years buying it, right? You're already behind the curve. So trying to balance speed with fiduciary oversight, because if you're spending taxpayer dollars, you want to make sure you're doing them right and not having fraud and abuse or waste. But I think, again, when you think about new technologies, if you know exactly what you want to buy from a software standpoint a year in advance, it's probably wrong to begin with, because it's going to change. So I think Mel's recommendation for smaller state and local governments, find ways to accelerate your process, and more specifically, no need to reinvent the wheel, right? There are lots of great examples out there of acquisition methodologies and processes that you can copy that have been tried and true, that allows you to have that right balance between mission effectiveness and risk reduction.
Fantastic. And so we're now going to bring all the panelists back, and we're going to open it up to Q&A from the audience. I'm excited that we've gotten so many questions. And so before we continue, I just want to remind you to please make sure that you use the Q&A box to ask any questions that you have of the group. I don't think we're going to be able to get to them all, but I'm extremely excited to ask questions of the panelists and to move the conversation forward. And so the first question is for Cecilia and Liv, and that question is, what government entities should I be reaching out to as a consumer to help get more companies to make digital afterlife options available?
Sure, thanks. So we think of the companies and the government, the things that those different groups can do as slightly separate. So in terms of who you could reach out to in the government, you can talk to regulators, essentially. So your state legislatures, and particularly regulators who are determining how to implement the data privacy laws that your state already has.
Yeah, one method for doing that is via public comments. We left sample language for a proposal to change some of the language in the California Consumer Privacy Act regulations. That's one method that can be used, and it's something you can kind of stay up to date with your own local and state legislators as well, like Cecilia mentioned. Email them, send them messages, say, hey, this is something we should think about when we're considering data privacy and how that's implemented in our state.
I think just giving a little plug, so the Hub is trying to provide opportunities for people to learn about policy impact and how to do this sort of work. So we're hoping later in the summer, not just to be releasing products, but actually to be doing webinars, training members of the audience and others on how you can get engaged. You should also think about other stakeholders that you can approach personally, your state and local representatives, people who are working for the governor, people who are, in the state of California. It's actually quite surprising how infrequently the public reaches out to public servants and how likely they are overall to respond to you. So I don't know, Raj, if you had any experience with that, with the public actually reaching out and getting the chance to engage. I know you did a bunch of public events, but I definitely encourage people to get involved in that. So the next question is for the Matt, who I will use for shorthand. My company usually recommends to individuals and married couples that they have a secure password and note sharing application. Personally, I use LastPass with a shared folder with my wife. In that folder are all my accounts she would need to access if I pass. Is this a solution you explored? And what would you recommend in addition to this from a personal level? So actually that question could go to both teams. I'll open it up first on the cybersecurity side. Is that a good cybersecurity practice? And then I'd love to hear from Liv and Cecilia, is that a good digital afterlife practice?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And it is funny how that kind of spans both projects, which is great. So yeah, LastPass, password managers in general were one of the solutions that we looked into, and password managers can be very useful from both our small business side and from the personal side of being able to manage and make sure that your passwords stay secure. So they're one of the things that are on our website of recommendations of solutions that you can use. From the side of being able to share, their passwords after someone's passed away. I'll let Cecilia and Liv talk about that a little bit more in detail, but they do have that option. It's not necessarily set up, I believe, for at least for LastPass. I'm not sure about other password managers, but LastPass is not necessarily set up for kind of the, if you pass away, it's more so allow someone to take over your account if for whatever reason. But I'll hand it off to Liv and Cecilia to talk a little bit more about that one.
Sure. So yes, but I guess I would say this is actually what most people do who have thought about it at all. A lot of people put a list of passwords in their will, or they say like all of my stuff is here, even if they don't have a password manager. There's some issues with that. If you put it in your will, it becomes public. And obviously it's not a secure practice in general to share passwords. And also, you're violating terms of service in general. So most terms of service will say that you can't share your password. You can't share your account with someone else.
There are, I think, a couple of other things too that companies can do to improve the software design around some of these. Instead of sharing access to an entire vault, maybe they get a one-time code that you has to have a certain amount of time elapsed before you validate, like, yes, this code, like if you don't respond to approving or denying the request, maybe it assumes that like Google's an active account manager, you've been inactive, you didn't respond to this request for somebody else to access your vault after a week, then you have access to it. There are trade-offs, and one of the reasons we call for more research in this space is because there's no one very clear design for how to share really sensitive information and make sure that the person that you're sharing it with only gets access to what they need at a specific time, in addition to what Cecilia mentioned.
Great, thank you. And I guess the one thing I'd add on the cybersecurity side is that historically, I've recommended that while you should use a password manager for most passwords, password managers are key targets. So especially if you are somebody who, for whatever reason, might be highly targeted by nation states or others, might be best to keep your most important passwords, like your email, health, banking records. You might just want to memorize a few of those, and that way, even if your password manager gets breached, the keys to your entire kingdom are not present all in one place. So our next question, keeping with Cecilia and Liv, my mother is 88 and very active on Facebook. Is there any risk to keeping her profile active when she passes away after I've secured it with new passwords and retrieved any photos I want?
Okay. It really will depend. If you're actively monitoring it the way you might with your own account, that the active, like keeping it alive in and of itself may not be the risk, but like Cecilia mentioned, about a third of people who pass away in America are targeted for identity theft. So there is a risk that someone else may report the account belonging to a deceased individual. I know Cecilia's done a little bit more research specifically into Facebook's instantiation of this feature, and it depends, platforms are always changing and evolving. So what's true today may not be true a couple of weeks or months or even days from now. But as long as it's being actively secured, the greater risk comes in the accounts just being completely ignored and abandoned. There is the question of memorialization and the benefits of acting on that user's behalf rather than just putting the profile into a state where people can't sign into it unless you're the account manager for that account, which isn't a very common feature for a lot of platforms, but Facebook does offer, which may be another consideration. It keeps the profile in the state that it was. You could make some minor changes to it, but it prevents other unauthorized users from signing in down the road, which is the risk vector to target there as well. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Cecilia.
Sure, yeah. I would talk to your mom about who she wants to take over her Facebook, what she wants to have happen, and who she wants to be in charge of the account after she passes away, because she can choose one person to be the official steward. And Facebook, like Liv mentioned, is pretty advanced in this area compared to almost every other online platform. So they have ways to indicate on the platform that she's passed away, so it's not confusing for people. So it would say, remembering her name. And you can pin some information at the top if you have that stewardship position about like where she might want people to donate or something like that. So using the tools that the platform has specifically for Facebook is actually a great plan, which isn't true for most.
Great. So the next question is for Raj. Turns out we've got some folks really interested in cyber insurance and some of the details here. So the question is, do insurance companies use a common gap analysis methodology or cybersecurity underwriting process, or is it particular or proprietary to each? And then if there is no common methodology, is there a way that one could be built?
Again, not to have a commercial, but that's kind of what my company is trying to do. So there is not a common data-driven nor dynamic view of cybersecurity underwriting, particularly for the small businesses, right? So if you think about insurance and insurance pricing, it's frequency times severity, right? And you build an actuarial table. Problem with cyber is both of those types of data are opaque and not clear. So we know frequency of breaches, but we don't always necessarily know the true causality, right? On what part of the cybersecurity stack failed. And then severity, again, sometimes is very hard to pin down, especially if you think about business interruption and record. So I think trying to build out that methodology, there's, I think, several players trying to get that right. It's going to take both some data sharing as well as expert opinion. And I think one of the other challenges has been, particularly for SMBs, is again, because these policies are small, historically it doesn't take a lot of real data to underwrite those policies, which then means those policies are limited. I mean, they have exclusions, they have size limitations, and so it's currently, I would say the industry looks at cyber insurance as a compliance item to accomplish. So, I need to say I have it for a vendor agreement or something, rather than looking at it as a core part of transferring one's cyber risk. And so I think that's where the industry is going to evolve as these products get more mature. So I think it's early days, but very interesting ones.
Awesome. Thank you, Raj. So I want to turn the next question to the Matts. We have a questioner who asked, how do you define small businesses? That is, at what point is a company too big for your solutions to work? How does a company know when they need to invest in the higher cost outsourced professional security solutions?
This is very insightful. So the government actually has a 50-page spreadsheet on how they define a small business, depending on your industry. And sometimes it depends on the number of people that you employ, and sometimes it depends on the actual revenue that you generate. So it's really industry dependent. In some of the manufacturing, it's up to 1,500 employees is a small business. So we think that these policies that we put together are, on the procurement side, it can apply to any business. It's not going to be just a small business that can benefit. On the resources side, the larger companies are going to do these things. They're going to have in-house experts that implement them for them. Those resources are really much more targeting the small business. You may even say micro businesses, which are under 20. We were thinking businesses under about 100 people. After that point, you really should think about hiring somebody either internal or external to manage that for you. Matthew, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, and to add to that, for our risk assessment tool, Laser, so if you're in the medium or the higher risk side, we do recommend considering outsourcing or getting external help, and we actually provide some guidance on how you can start to find that help, looking at different, what we call managed service providers or managed security service providers. So that's definitely a consideration. So if companies are going through and doing something a little bit more complex and they have a little bit higher risk and take the assessment, they'll see probably a recommendation that they might need to get some external help because they might not have the resources to do all this in-house.
Fantastic, thanks. So back to Liv and Cecilia, how do you plan to engage the larger companies that are storing data that could be affected in the digital afterlife? Do you have any idea whether they're going to resist or embrace your toolkits?
We have a couple of companies are starting to explore these features, and that was one of the principles that led us towards a design toolkit being an impactful way of helping guide that, because very few platforms have done work and published work on how these types of features can be implemented, and it's pretty specific to different types of accounts. One of the things that we've talked about doing with the design toolkit is having a design workshop, so that if you work at one of these companies as a user interface designer or a product owner or an engineer, that we would actually do a hands-on workshop to lead people who are working in the tech industry through some of these design guidelines, so that it would be more collaborative and engaging with the companies for their individual needs. A lot of companies will have their own processes for implementing different account features and how that work is prioritized. So as outside to different companies, we're limited in what we can do directly to influence them, and we've been looking at the design toolkit and workshop as a way that we can engage folks who are working in this space more generally, in order to take some of these principles as new platforms are being developed, or as people are going to work on accounts of existing platforms, and share that knowledge more widely as a whole.
Excellent. That was sort of the positive spin. The negative side is uncertainty is a liability. There have been lawsuits about people's data after their death. So there was a big one in against Yahoo in Massachusetts several years ago. Liv probably remembers more of the details, but a family wanted access to the emails of their son who'd passed away, and Yahoo had privacy rules that they didn't want to share those with the family. It was a pretty long and costly court battle. And it's basically a question of, if you let people make decisions before you pass away, then you're reducing your uncertainty and your liability down the road.
Fabulous. Well, I definitely don't want to end on that note. So we are getting close to the end of our time. So I'm going to ask a lightning round to our panelists. So what is the bumper sticker that you want people to take away from this panel? What's the 1 or 2 sentences that you think is most important? And I'm going to call on you in the order that I see you. So first, Matt Sievers.
Sure. Do something. So there are lots of different things that businesses can do. The real big takeaway is to actually do something, take action, take a lunch, and actually make a change on your business to make it more secure.
Fantastic. Cecilia?
Think ahead. It's helpful for your family and for yourself if you've made some decisions about this before you pass away.
Great. Matthew Schroeder?
Kind of similar to Matt's. Start today. Just do something today. A little thing can help to improve your security. You never know what might prevent an attack.
Liv?
Make a plan and tell someone about it.
That's an actual bumper sticker, so she gets bonus points. Raj?
I'd say that the government and large tech companies are not coming to save you. So you need to take matters in your own hands if you have a business or information that one day you want to pass along.
And I guess from the Hub's perspective, the answer for us is that you can actually make an impact. You don't have to wait to be, in government, have a job at a company working on policy. As our fellows have shown here today, you can build stuff even, as a private citizen that can really help others in these really difficult, really complex spaces. And so I hope all of you will take a moment to think about where you can get engaged as we go forward in these difficult times. So since we're almost out of time, I'd like to remind you all that this is a regular webinar series. We're going to be doing these webinars every 2 weeks on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Pacific time, at noon Eastern time. So it's a brown bag lunch, except we're sorry, we're not providing the lunch right now. Our next session will be on algorithmic bias in emerging technology. We'll be featuring our fellow Samara Trilling, who's done a bunch of work on discrimination in mortgages, as well as Anjana Rajan, who is focused on how can we get witnesses and bystanders in the counterterrorism space to share information more effectively. I'd love to thank the team who helped put this all together. David, Karner, Maddie, we've got an amazing team that's really been doing amazing work so far. And I'd also like to thank Javier, Ben, and the whole team, and of course Sevilla, who's been producing in the background the whole time. I'd love to thank our fellows. This is a huge congratulatory moment for them as they wrap up their time at the Hub. They've still got to go pitch their projects in the outside world, but we're glad that they're finally public and out there. And I'd love to thank Raj for taking the time today to join us. So to all of you, I hope you see some inspiration for impact, and we'd love to move forward with you all and hope you'll join us for our next webinar. Please check out the links in the chat, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much and have a great day.